"We don't host people like you here. Get out before I call security to have you removed." The words, sharp as shards of glass, sliced through the hushed opulence of the marble lobby, echoing off the crystal chandeliers as the blonde receptionist sneered. The black woman stood frozen before the grand mahogany desk, a solitary figure in the vast, gilded space of the luxury hotel. Security was already moving in, their presence a silent, looming threat. But there was a truth, a monumental irony that hung in the air, unknown to them all. The woman they were humiliating, the woman they were about to physically eject, owned the entire hotel chain. One phone call, and every single person complicit in this venomous display of prejudice would be fired. It was 9:30 on a cold Tuesday evening at the Grand Metropolitan in downtown Chicago. Polished marble floors gleamed, mirroring the warm golden light of the chandeliers that dripped from the vaulted ceiling. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft sigh, admitting Lauren Matthews into the lobby's embrace. At 37, Lauren carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who had carved her own path to success. Her intelligent brown eyes swept the room, a practiced gaze that caught details others missed. Her natural hair was styled in a neat professional bun, though a few errant strands, loosened by a long day of travel, softened the determined set of her jaw. Lauren's navy blue business suit was impeccably tailored, its quality undeniable, but it bore the faint wrinkles of a day spent in airports and on planes. Her matching heels clicked softly on the marble as she pulled a modest black suitcase behind her, not the designer luggage that usually graced these floors, but practical, efficient, and much like Lauren herself. Despite her fatigue, a profound dignity radiated from her. It was in the straightness of her shoulders and the high lift of her chin, the posture of a woman long accustomed to being the only one who looked like her in rooms of power, a woman used to being judged long before she ever spoke. Behind the front desk stood Sarah Mitchell, 32, with blonde hair styled in flawless waves and a face of curated perfection. She was the very picture of luxury hospitality. But as Lauren approached, an ugly sentiment flickered in her cold blue eyes. They raked over Lauren from head to toe, lingering on her hair, her travel-worn suit, her simple luggage. Sarah's glossy lips curved into a smile that was a mere technicality, a hollow gesture that never reached her eyes. "Good evening," Lauren said, her voice warm but tinged with exhaustion. "I'd like to book a room for the night, please." It was a simple request, uttered 1,000 times a day in hotels across the world. Sarah, however, responded as if examining something unpleasant. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone devoid of any actual apology. "We don't have any rooms available." The lie was blatant. The Grand Metropolitan's lobby was nearly empty. An elderly couple murmured by the fireplace. A businessman typed silently on a laptop near the vast windows. The air was serene, quiet with the unmistakable feeling of a hotel far from capacity. Lauren's gaze swept the lobby, taking it all in. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice still polite, though now laced with confusion. "It seems rather quiet tonight." And with that, the mask of professional courtesy crumbled. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice dripping with contempt, "this is a 5-star establishment. We don't host people like you here. You obviously can't afford it. Perhaps you should try the shelter downtown." The words hung in the air, a poisonous vapor. The irony was staggering. Lauren Matthews, the woman being directed to a homeless shelter, owned the very ground on which she stood. But Sarah didn't know that. She saw only a black woman who had wandered out of her depth. Behind her, the assistant clerk, Amy Chen, a young woman of 24, giggled, whispering something to Sarah that made them both smirk like cruel schoolgirls. Approaching from the side was the night manager, Jessica Torres. At 27, she carried herself with the swagger of someone drunk on a small taste of power. Her dark eyes rolled dramatically as she approached the desk, making no effort to hide her disdain. Still assuming she was dealing with professionals, Lauren reached into her purse. "Do you need my credit card or identification?" she asked, producing a black corporate American Express and her driver's license, which listed an address in one of Chicago's most affluent neighborhoods. Sarah didn't even glance at them. "The card is probably stolen," she said with a smirk. "We don't want any trouble here." Amy snickered. "She probably can't even afford our parking rates." Lauren's composure was a fortress. She had faced this venom before, in different rooms, from different faces. Losing her temper now would only validate their prejudice. She took a deep, steadying breath. "Is there a problem with my credit card or my ID?" she repeated, her voice calm but now edged with steel. Jessica, the night manager, stepped forward. "The problem," she said, her voice a low sneer, "is that you don't belong here. This isn't that kind of neighborhood." At that moment, the security guard, Marcus Johnson, took a deliberate step closer, using his large frame to loom over Lauren in a clear act of intimidation. "Lady," he said, his voice a low growl, "you heard them. Time to go." 4 employees, united in their bigotry, were now ganging up on a single customer. Lauren met the manager's gaze directly. "I'd like to speak with the general manager, please," she said, her voice unwavering. Jessica puffed out her chest. "I am the manager," she snapped, "and I'm telling you to leave." "Then I would like to speak with his superior," Lauren replied calmly. Sarah leaned forward, her smile a venomous slash. "Mr. Richardson doesn't waste his time on people like you." There it was again. People like you. "Yeah," Amy chimed in. "He has real guests to worry about." Lauren drew herself up to her full height. "I simply want to book a room. I have valid payment and valid identification. And I'm telling you, we're full," Jessica said, speaking slowly, as if to a child. "Can't you understand English?" Marcus cracked his knuckles, a sharp, threatening sound. "Want me to escort her out?" he asked Jessica. Just then, the general manager himself emerged from his office. Robert Richardson, 55 and impeccably dressed, moved like a man who had never been questioned. But when his eyes fell on Lauren, his expression curdled into one of pure hostility. He saw not a customer, but an intrusion. "What is all this commotion?" he demanded. "This woman refuses to leave," Sarah reported, painting Lauren as the aggressor. Richardson looked Lauren up and down, his disdain palpable. "Ma'am," he said, his voice slick with condescension, "I think you're lost. The bus station is 6 blocks that way." He then added with a smug smile, "Our rooms start at $400 a night. That's probably more than you make in a month." While he spoke, Jessica leaned toward him, whispering just loud enough for Lauren to hear. "She's probably here to case the place." The accusation that she was a criminal planning a robbery was the final, baseless insult. Richardson's patience snapped. "Marcus," he commanded, his voice sharp with authority, "remove this woman immediately. She is disturbing the atmosphere." Lauren had not raised her voice. She had not made a single threat. Her very presence, it seemed, was the disturbance. As Marcus advanced, his intentions clear, Lauren spoke, her voice still a pillar of calm in a sea of hatred. "I'm not leaving until someone explains why a customer with available credit and valid ID is being refused a room." Richardson's face twisted in fury. "Because we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone," he spat, "and we don't want your kind here." The final mask was off. This was not a misunderstanding, it was a policy. It was then that Lauren Matthews, standing before this wall of hostility, calmly reached into her purse and took out her phone. "Fine," she said, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that should have chilled them to the bone. "I'll just make a call." Sarah Mitchell laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Call whoever you want," she sneered. "No one is going to help you here." If only she had known who was on the other end of that line. Sarah was operating under a simple, flawed assumption that Lauren was powerless, that she had no recourse, that there would be no consequences for this blatant discrimination. Lauren, however, simply dialed a number. When the call connected, she spoke a single sentence that would change everything. "David, assemble the board for a meeting at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in 1 hour." Richardson overheard fragments of the conversation, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty disturbed his arrogant demeanor. "Board meeting?" he scoffed, but a tremor in his voice betrayed a confidence that was already beginning to fray. "Lady, what kind of games are you playing?" Lauren ended the call and looked directly at Richardson. She possessed the serene calm of a poker player holding an unbeatable hand. "I'll be back in exactly 1 hour," she said, her voice carrying an authority none of them yet recognized. "Have your head manager contact the branch manager immediately." The specificity of her instructions should have been another warning sign. Lauren wasn't making vague threats. She was issuing precise directives, moving with the efficiency of someone who understood the corporate hierarchy intimately. But Richardson, blinded by his own prejudice, responded with a dismissive sneer he would regret for the rest of his life. "You're delusional if you think anyone cares about your complaints." He was wrong. Because Lauren Matthews wasn't just any customer. She wasn't just a successful businesswoman who could afford their most expensive suite. She was the CEO and majority owner of the Sterling Matthews Hospitality Group, the company that owned the Grand Metropolitan Hotel and by extension paid Richardson's salary. In exactly 1 hour, Richardson and his racist employees were going to learn what happens when you discriminate against your own boss. And the justice that followed would be swift, absolute, and deeply satisfying. Lauren walked out of the Grand Metropolitan with the same dignity she had entered with, but now her stride held a new purpose, a silent promise of the storm that was about to break. She moved through the lobby like a queen reclaiming her castle, her power invisible to those who had just humiliated her. The automatic doors closed behind her with a soft whoosh, leaving her in the hotel's parking lot, bathed in the glow of expensive landscape lighting. Before her, the Chicago skyline stretched into the night, a testament to the ambition that had built her empire. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about the beauty of the city. She was thinking about justice. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the controlled fury of a righteous anger about to be channeled into decisive action. Her first call set the gears of retribution in motion. "David," Lauren said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Pull all management files for the Grand Metropolitan, immediately." David Sterling, the chairman of the board, didn't question the urgency. He knew Lauren. When she gave an order like this, something was deeply wrong. "I want performance reviews, hiring records, customer complaints, everything," Lauren continued. "And David? Start with Robert Richardson, Sarah Mitchell, Jessica Torres, Amy Chen, and Marcus Johnson. I want to know every detail about how they've been treating our guests." She wasn't finished. Her second call was to her legal department. "Legal, this is Lauren," she said, her voice the sound of authority, the voice of the woman who signed their considerable paychecks. "I need discrimination documentation started immediately. Yes, you heard me correctly, against our own property." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I was just denied service at the Grand Metropolitan based on my race. I have witnesses. I want security footage pulled and a complete civil rights violation report on my desk by morning. These people just committed federal crimes, and I want it documented." The third call would bring her full power to bear. "Board members," she announced, her tone now that of a CEO done playing games. "Emergency meeting in 45 minutes. We have a serious civil rights violation at one of our properties, and heads are going to roll tonight." Emergency board meetings were reserved for catastrophes. That Lauren was calling one signaled a company-threatening crisis. "I need everyone there," she commanded. "William Hayes, all department heads, and I want our diversity and inclusion team on standby. We're about to have a very public reckoning with institutional racism, and our response will be perfect." As Lauren stood in that parking lot, orchestrating the corporate thunder that was about to strike, the staff inside the Grand Metropolitan were celebrating their victory. Sarah Mitchell, the blonde receptionist who had started it all with her "you people" comment, was leaning against the front desk, glowing with smug satisfaction. "Good riddance," she said to Amy Chen with a self-satisfied smile. "These people always think they're entitled to everything." Amy, not to be outdone in cruelty, added, "Did you see her cheap suitcase? Probably from Walmart." The pettiness was breathtaking, a casual dismissal rooted in the racist assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly afford quality. Jessica Torres, the night manager, joined in. "At least she's gone," she said with relief. "We can get back to serving real customers." Marcus Johnson, the security guard, voiced his only regret. "Should have let me throw her out from the start." The casual violence in his words was chilling. While his employees congratulated themselves, Robert Richardson felt a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Something about the woman's confidence, her specific mention of the branch manager, didn't add up. He retreated to his office and dialed his superior. "Sir," Richardson began, "we had a small incident tonight. Some woman... She claimed she was calling a board meeting." He tried to sound dismissive, but his voice was thin. "She seemed educated, knew some corporate terminology, but obviously she was just trying to intimidate us." He never finished the sentence. Through his office window, Richardson saw the first black SUV pull up to the hotel entrance, then a second and a third. They moved with a silent, predatory grace. Well-dressed men and women emerged, their purposeful strides speaking of serious business. Sir, Richardson interrupted himself, his voice trailing off. There are people arriving. Expensive cars. They look like board members. His superior was asking questions, but Richardson couldn't hear him. Because now, walking through the lobby doors were some of the most powerful people in the hospitality industry, and they all looked furious. The lobby, quiet moments before, now crackled with the energy of a corporate crisis. Leading the group was William Hayes, the very branch manager Lauren had named. Hayes was a man who had built his career on excellence and treating every guest with respect. He walked into that lobby like a storm front moving in, his expression promising no mercy for those responsible. Richardson rushed out of his office, his phone still clutched in his hand, panic finally blooming on his face. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Who are all these people?" Hayes scanned the lobby, his cold gaze finally landing on Richardson. "Robert," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with menace. "What the hell happened here tonight?" Richardson, desperately trying to regain control, puffed up his chest. "Sir, we just removed a disruptive person," he blustered. "Standard procedure." At that moment, the lobby doors opened again. Lauren Matthews walked in, flanked by more board members. She moved with the certainty of a general about to win a decisive battle. Richardson, still focused on Hayes, barely glanced at her. It was his final, fatal mistake. "Security," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Lauren. "This woman is trespassing. Get her out of here." Hayes turned his head and a look of understanding, followed by barely controlled rage, passed between him and Lauren. He turned back to his subordinate. "Robert," Hayes said, his voice now dangerously low, "I'd like you to meet Lauren Matthews." Richardson stared blankly, the name meaning nothing to him. Hayes let the silence stretch, then delivered the words that shattered Richardson's world. "CEO and majority owner of the Sterling Matthews Hospitality Group." He let that sink in before delivering the final, crushing blow. "Everyone's boss." A deafening silence fell over the marble lobby. Color drained from Richardson's face as if a plug had been pulled. He was staring at the woman he had told to try a homeless shelter, the woman whose salary he had insulted, the woman who owned the very ground he stood on. Sarah Mitchell's smug superiority shattered like cheap glass. Jessica Torres took a physical step back as if distance could save her. Amy Chen began to sob, ugly, gasping cries of someone who knew their life was ruined. And Marcus Johnson, the imposing security guard, suddenly seemed to shrink, trying to disappear into the floor. Lauren Matthews stood in the center of the chaos, her composure absolute. This moment was the culmination of a lifetime of slights, of doors closed in her face, of being told she didn't belong. When she spoke, her voice was a blade in the terrified silence. "Good evening," she said, each word perfectly measured. 2 hours ago, I attempted to book a room at this property." The silence thickened, heavy with the sound of careers ending. "I was told," Lauren continued, her eyes locking onto Sarah, "that this hotel doesn't serve my kind. Ms. Mitchell, would you like to repeat what you said to me?" Sarah stammered, her words a pathetic scramble. "Ms. Matthews, I didn't know. If I had known who you were." Lauren's response was a knockout punch. "So your racism is conditional?" she asked, her voice sharp with controlled fury. "You only discriminate against black people who aren't wealthy? Your prejudice has a salary threshold?" The question exposed the rotten core of Sarah's apology. It wasn't remorse for her bigotry. It was regret at being caught directing it at someone with power. Richardson, desperate to save his career, jumped in. "Ms. Matthews, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding," Lauren cut him off with surgical precision, "is how any of you still have jobs." The finality in her voice was absolute. This wasn't a discussion. It was a verdict. She then turned her focus to Jessica Torres, her gaze that of a prosecutor laying out an airtight case. "Jessica, you called me trouble. You said I was here to case the place. You told me I didn't belong in this neighborhood. Explain that." Jessica's voice, once so confident, now cracked under the pressure. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," Lauren replied, her tone leaving no room for excuses. She refused to let anyone minimize their actions or hide behind a weak apology. "You looked at a black woman asking for a hotel room and assumed she was a criminal. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was racism." Her gaze shifted to Amy Chen, the young woman who had sneered at Lauren's suitcase and questioned her money. "Amy, what was that about my credit card being fraudulent? What exactly made you think I had stolen money?" Amy was sobbing now, a desperate, gut-wrenching cry that comes from the sudden, terrifying knowledge that you have destroyed your own future. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. You didn't mean what precisely? Lauren pressed, her voice unyielding. You didn't mean to assume a black woman couldn't legitimately afford to stay here? You didn't mean to suggest I was a criminal based on nothing but the color of my skin? But Lauren wasn't interested in apologies that bloomed only after being caught. She was not there to soothe their discomfort. She turned and addressed Hayes and the board with the clinical precision of a CEO delivering a crisis report. Every single employee on duty tonight participated in blatant racial discrimination, she stated, her voice carrying across the lobby with perfect clarity. This wasn't one person having a bad day. This wasn't a communication breakdown. This was institutional racism in action, from the front desk to the general manager's office. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle upon the board members. They told me I belonged in a homeless shelter. They accused me of theft. They said I didn't belong here. They threatened me with physical removal. And when I maintained my dignity and simply asked for the service I was due, they escalated their attacks. Hayes was taking notes, his expression growing darker with each damning detail. Mr. Richardson, Lauren continued, her focus now on the general manager, informed me that your rooms cost more than I make in a month. He then directed me to the bus station. When I persisted, he ordered security to remove me for disturbing the atmosphere. Then justice arrived. Swift, absolute, and delivered with the surgical precision of someone who had built a career on making difficult decisions. Mr. Richardson, your employment is terminated immediately. The words struck him like a physical blow. His face cycled from white to red and back to a pasty white as the reality sank in. 15 years of service, vaporized in a single sentence. Cornered, Richardson's desperation erupted into a threat. You can't do this. I'll sue for wrongful termination. I have rights. Lauren's response was ice cold. Please do. I have security footage of every moment. I have witnesses from this board. I have documented evidence of federal civil rights violations. I would welcome the opportunity to present your behavior in a court of law. She let that sink in. But let me save you the legal fees, Mr. Richardson. Racial discrimination is not a protected activity. You cannot sue for being fired for breaking the law. And so they fell, one by one, like dominoes in a perfectly executed sequence of consequences. Sarah, Jessica, Amy, and Marcus were all fired on the spot. Years of employment, benefits, and careers, all of it destroyed in minutes by their own prejudice. Ms. Mitchell, Lauren said to the sobbing former receptionist, your comment about you people was recorded. Your suggestion that I try a homeless shelter was documented. Good luck explaining that during your next background check. Sarah's crying intensified as she realized this moment would follow her for the rest of her professional life. Jessica, your comment about me casing the place suggested an inherent belief that black customers are criminals. That is now in your permanent employment file, which will be made available to any future employer who requests it. Jessica, so sure of her authority just hours before, now looked as if she were going to be sick. Amy, your assumptions about stolen money and cheap luggage reveal a prejudice that makes you fundamentally unsuitable for any customer-facing role in this industry. And Marcus, Lauren said, turning to the former security guard, your eagerness to use physical intimidation against a customer showed exactly why you should never be trusted with a position of authority again. Hayes finally spoke, his voice heavy. Lauren, I had no idea this was the culture here. This is completely unacceptable. That is precisely the problem, William, she responded, her voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of a career spent fighting these very battles. This culture was allowed to exist because we weren't vigilant. We created an environment where people felt comfortable expressing their prejudices because they believed there would be no consequences. But Lauren didn't just destroy, she rebuilt. And what she built next was a testament to what true corporate leadership and human decency could achieve. Within days, she installed entirely new leadership, each person chosen not just for their qualifications, but for their unwavering commitment to inclusive hospitality. Maria Rodriguez, an experienced leader focused on diversity, became the new general manager. James Washington, a former civil rights advocate, took over the front desk, driven by the belief that travel should be accessible to all. And Patricia Kim, an expert in cultural competence, became the new night manager. When Lauren finally approached the front desk to book her room, the same simple request that had ignited this firestorm, Maria's response was everything the original staff's was not. "It would be our honor, Ms. Matthews," Maria said with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the Grand Metropolitan. How can we make your stay exceptional?" The contrast was stunning. This was what hospitality was meant to be: professional, welcoming, and centered on service, not judgment. Lauren's transformation went far beyond personnel. She implemented comprehensive bias training, not just at this hotel, but across her entire chain. She forged partnerships with civil rights organizations and created new, robust reporting systems to ensure that any future complaint was taken seriously. 6 months later, speaking to a gathering of industry leaders, Lauren laid out her philosophy. "Racism in business isn't just morally wrong," she explained. "It's economically stupid. When you exclude customers, you are turning away revenue. You are damaging your brand, creating liability, and perpetuating a cycle of hate that ultimately hurts everyone." The changes she implemented rippled through the industry, prompting other hotel chains to examine their own practices. What began with one woman being denied a room became a catalyst for industry-wide change. The Grand Metropolitan was no longer just a luxury hotel. It was a model for inclusive hospitality, where every guest was treated with the dignity that should have always been the standard. Lauren's final reflection captured the essence of her leadership. The most powerful response to hate isn't more hate, it's building something better. When someone shows you their ugliest side, you don't have to meet them there. You can respond with grace, with justice, and with a relentless determination to create change. She looked out at the bustling lobby of the transformed hotel. "Sometimes you have to tear down the old to build something new. Richardson and his staff showed me their character that night, and then I showed them mine." This is what justice looks like when it's served with vision. If this story inspires you, if you believe that accountability matters and that bad actions must have consequences, share this with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes the universe doesn't just deliver what people deserve, it delivers it with compound interest.